Hey you guys. Okay, so we're going to talk today about reading and analyzing essays. Hopefully you did your reading so you kind of know what's going on here. Okay, so think about how many essays have you written in your lifetime? All right, so going back, just looking at just STAR. So you wrote in the 4th grade, you wrote an expository. 7th grade, you wrote expository again. 9th grade, you wrote expository. And then 10th grade, you wrote persuasive. Okay, what other essays have you had to write in your lifetime? A lot of times you have to write creative stories, or it's expository persuasive, but you probably haven't had to write nearly as much as, in 1 year anyway, as you had to this year. We had the mindset report, which was expository but could have persuasive elements to it. Visual analysis, again, that's an expository that can be somewhat persuasive. You also have the evaluation, position, and problem solution in the first semester in 1301, and all 3 of those were persuasive. Then you've done the poetry analysis, the short story analysis, the drama analysis, and your literary research this semester. So again, those are expository, but they may have persuasive elements to them. So keep in mind that a lot of times essays have multiple elements to them. You just have to decide what it is overall. So what are your feelings towards writing? Okay, I want you to take the time and discuss, and if you'll please push pause so the kids can discuss. Okay, so moving on. So the history of the essay, they just talk about it briefly. In the textbook, just to give you a little bit information, the tone is very personal and informal. It's about whatever intrigued the writer. It was usually light. They talked about conversations, education, friendship, gardening. It was entertaining and it was insightful, but it's nothing like it is today. And today, a lot of it is political. A lot of it is about scandals. We have morality is in there, religion is in there. Sometimes it's humorous, even in satire kind of way. You see it in things like newspapers and magazines, on the internet everywhere, blogs. And so we get that, so the people who are writers, we oftentimes call them a columnist, an op-ed writer, a blogger, a sports writer. They're still essay writers, we just give them a different name. But usually it's very emotional, outspoken, and it's usually very opinionated, especially when it's over a controversial topic. So there are 3 types of essays that we've already kind of talked about. There's narrative, there's expository, and there's argument. And a lot of times they can be multiple things. So think about how we've kind of talked about in your attention grabber, you can use an anecdote or a short story to kind of develop and get your readers intrigued. So you're using a narrative element in an expository essay, or maybe a narrative element in an argumentative essay. And we'll talk more about that when I talk about Mother Tongue from Amy Tan. Narrative, this is what you first started reading as a child. This is what most of you enjoy reading. It tells a story. It also oftentimes springs from an event or an experience in a writer's life. It even springs from dreams. So Stephanie Myers, who wrote the Twilight series, that all came from a dream. J.K. Rowling, Harry Potter series came from a dream. So these are women that have made billion-dollar industries out of dreams. The purpose is to make a point, present an idea, or make an argument. Even though it's not argumentative, and that's where we usually get the idea of a theme. But we don't think about a persuasive or an expository essay having a theme. There's also personal commentary in there, there's reflection, and there's oftentimes opinion. You get the tone can be a wide variety of things. It can be something like happy and joyful. It can be something sad or painful, frustrated. Any of those kind of work. We'll discuss the learning curve on Wednesday of next week, and so we'll talk more about the narrative essay at that point. Expository. Expository is what you're probably most familiar with. It's what you've been doing since the 4th grade STAR test. It shares, explains, suggests, explores information, emotions, and ideas. It is the broadest category. This is the one that most essays are, but they may have a persuasive element, or they may have a narrative element to it, or even both. They show and share insight, so they still do have a theme to them. Argumentative, it's intending to prove a point with supporting evidence. Keep in mind that supporting evidence may very well be an example that makes it seem like it's narrative, but they're just little narrative snippets, not an actual narrative. So think of a narrative as you have the exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. So kind of keep that in mind, that if you can't identify those bits, then it's most likely not narrative. There is a difference between proving and persuading. Oftentimes you can prove stuff and you're not going to persuade the person at all, especially if the person isn't open-minded. A person who is very closed-minded, where they're very stuck in their ways, or they truly believe what they're telling you, they are not going to be able to be persuaded. That doesn't mean you can't prove your point. That's oftentimes what I tell you guys, is that I don't have to agree with what you say as long as you back it up. Okay? And that's part of being an adult, is learning that somebody can have a different opinion, have reasons for their opinion, but you don't have to agree with them. Often people are persuaded with very little proof, and that's where I have a problem in life, is when people say, well, I feel this way because I just feel that way, without having any proof. And usually people feel that way when it becomes emotional for them. Anything that yanks at that emotion, that pathos, they can be easily persuaded in, even if logically it doesn't make any sense. So you use facts and statistics, which is the logos part, with examples and personal anecdotes. That is our ethos and our pathos. In that way, if you have that combination, you're more likely to persuade or at least prove your point to somebody else. I like the quote I gave in the book. It says, we think with our heads but feel with our hearts. So you kind of have to hit both when you're writing an essay. So when you read an essay and you're analyzing an essay, does that author discuss both the logical and the emotional and ethical part? Formal versus informal. This is one thing that you can evaluate. Formal, the topics are serious. They have a tight, clear structure. It's usually that classical structure where you have your attention grabber, your thesis, a background paragraph, a topic sentence with supporting detail, concluding sentence. You do that 3 times. The opposing view with a rebuttal, and then you have your conclusion. The tone is usually impersonal and detached. The proof, again, is always those facts, the statistics, and data, and the language and the sentence structure and the word choice is very formal. They use a complex sentences, and they use words that have a higher vocabulary, and oftentimes what we call jargon, meaning that it is words that you would use in that industry or that field of study. Informal, on the other hand, is very lighthearted. It's going to have that same structure, but it's not going to be as strict. It may be a little bit more free-flowing. The thesis may appear, in a second body paragraph, or it may not appear until the end. There may be, more of a chronological story to prove the point, and it just doesn't follow that classical structure. So the proven support is usually details, emotional, narratives, personal example, language, and so the words in the sentence structure are very simple, easy for anybody to understand, and this is why newspapers are oftentimes really easy to understand, and they're a little bit more informal in that way, because it makes it where everybody can understand it, not just somebody who is an expert in that field. Okay? So the voice and the tone, you could talk about voice and tone. They kind of go hand in hand. So voice is the individual personality that comes alive with the words. And we'll talk again about all these things when we talk about mother tongue from Amy Tan. So in person, when you see a person, if they're standing like this, they're probably mad or they're cold, one of the two. If a person is like, they're happy. If they're singing la 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 la, again, they're happy, versus if they're grunting, then they're probably mad. So you can tell a person's voice based on their physical appearance, based on their body language, based on what they say, how they say it, the tone. Whereas in reading, you have to follow the context clues a lot of times to get this. Does the word have a positive or a negative connotation? And that way it kind of helps you get the voice. Tone is the speaker's attitude towards the topic, and we get tone oftentimes through the voice. So irony is a contrast between reality and what seems to be real, or the book says a contrast between appearance, expectation, and reality. There's the verbal irony, which is sarcasm, contrast between what is said by the writer and what is actually meant. Situational is a contrast between what is expected and what actually happens. Dramatic is a contrast between what the character expects and what actually happens. And in those cases, the reader actually knows what's going to happen. It has that drama, that dramatic effect that the author wants to get. Kind of that idea of there's a boogeyman on the other side of the door and the audience knows and they're going, don't open the door, don't open the door, don't open the door. But they open the door. So it adds that adrenaline, that dramatic effect that you know what's going to happen, but you don't want it to happen. It will talk more about irony when we talk about a modest proposal. You need to read that in class tomorrow, so that way we can discuss it in class on Monday. Word choice and style, again, kind of helps create the voice. That's where you choose words that are difficult, jargon, or we make things that are a little bit easier. Do we want to use different types of figurative language to add a little bit more humor? So something like a hyperbole, an idiom, those add a little bit more of a lighthearted tone versus something that's a little bit more detail and diction and things like that that don't have that as much. Concrete details and images oftentimes pull the readers into the text. Formal vocabulary evoke a different response from readers than informal non-standard words. The frequency of images and figurative language has an effect on readers and their purposes. Why does the author choose to use pictures? Why do they choose to use these figurative languages? Are they humorous figurative languages, lighthearted figurative languages, or are they more serious stuff? So that kind of will help you also figure out what the voice is and what the tone is, and ultimately the theme. So the theme is, what is the point? What does the writer want to share with his audience? And we've talked about this before. What does the author want to teach, prove, or convince the readers of? Usually in a narrative, it's easier to figure that out than it is in a formal essay. So aims of an essay, is it there to inform somebody or preach to somebody or teach? Most informal expository essays inform and preach. Most formal argumentative essays teach a lesson or convince the reader of a practical moral view, often written in response to a perceived political or social problem. That's where we get a lot of our satire from, is that it's humorous and it's lighthearted. However, it's there to really show the political or social problem. And again, we'll see that again with a modest proposal. So reveal is the other thing. There are three things. So inform, preach, or reveal. So most good narrative and formal essays share and reveal things that are insightful about human nature. But it's a little bit more difficult sometimes to determine what it is that you're supposed to learn from it. Sometimes, not all the times. I think it's easier. So there's a checklist on page 149. Use this when I give you your essay. We'll kind of go back to this checklist as we read some of the other things before your final next week. So looking at mother tongue, hopefully you read mother tongue. It's very short. If you didn't, you should read it before you listen to this back. So anyway, so types of essay. What would you classify mother tongue? Would you say it's expository, narrative, or would you say it is persuasive? So the way that mother tongue works is that it has a lot of short anecdotal stories as examples. So really and truly, it is expository. There's nothing persuasive about it at all. It doesn't have that plot line like I was talking about with most narratives, where you have the exposition, the rising action, and the climax and all that. It doesn't have that. It has a thesis to it, and then it provides different scenarios and examples to back it up. So it is a very informal expository essay because it doesn't use the statistics and the data, but instead it uses examples. So it is as to what extent is the classification clear. And I do think it is confusing for some readers because it does have those narrative elements to it. But if you look at it on the actual plot line, it doesn't follow that. So therefore we have to, it does have a thesis, so therefore we have to say it's expository. So the language, style, and structure. So it's asked in general, is mother tongue formal or informal, and how so? So it is informal. Why? Well, it's informal because the sentence structure is very easy. The words, there's a lot of, she does a lot of her mother's dialect. And so in that case, it's very easy to read, but not at the same time because the dialect is so heavy. So what is Amy Tan's use of language? That's kind of the same question. Are there many instances of imagery, figurative language? If so, how do they connect to or support the essay? Well, there's a couple of figurative language in there. There's imagery is probably in everything you do, or in everything you read. Imagery is like the one answer you always can get right. So anywhere throughout there you can find imagery. But there is symbolism, and that's symbolism within the language. She talks about proper English. So Amy Tan's acceptance into American society and separation from her mother, that is what proper English symbolizes. Because her proper English is, this is how we talk in America, this is how I talk as a writer, this is not how I talk when I'm at home with my family. Whereas the simple English is symbolic of her and her mother's relationship, because that's how she talks when she's at home. She even talks about how her husband is so used to her at, you know, they've been married for 20 years, he's used to her talking that language with her mother, although she doesn't necessarily talk that mother tongue with him. So we do have imagery, and we do have symbolism there. There's some instances of similes in there where she uses as, I think I saw twice. They weren't real strong similes, but there were those occurrences of them. How would you describe Amy Tan's voice? You can tell her tone or her voice. For example, you can tell she's very agitated when she says, I was trying to calm her down, make her be quiet. She almost had this authoritative tone, like she was the mother and her mother was actually the child. And do you find her believable, and why? I think she is very believable in her voice because these are personal stories for her. We know that this is actually things that happened to her. She wrote the book, The Joy Luck Club, and she's written a few other pieces that she does share her experiences growing up. If you also want to kind of talk about the tone a little bit, she does shift. I don't know that we've talked about the word shift before in poetry, but we haven't really talked about it since, but tone can shift. So in the beginning, we get that she's very guilty, she's very annoyed, she's ashamed of her heritage and her mother. But then by the end, and after she kind of goes through all of these little scenarios, she kind of thinks back and she's like, well, you know, I guess I'm really, you know, proud of my heritage. She's no longer ashamed of it. She's gracious, she's appreciative of what she got to go through in her experiences. The theme, do you gain any insight about yourself or your writing from the essay? If so, explain. So again, I like to kind of talk about the motif before I start thinking about the theme and the tone. So think about, like, for example, one motif in here could be of finding one's voice. Finding one's, you know, literal voice, but also finding oneself, the metaphorical voice. You know, here she was, as a child, she grew up in American society and then the Asian American society. And she had to grow up between these two, and she had to figure out where she fit in this world. Because she talks about how, you know, she's giving a lecture and she's using all these big words, and then she goes home and talks to her mother and she uses this broken English, or this informal English. So she's stuck between these two worlds, and she has to find her place. And in the end, I think she finds her place. So that's where we kind of derived the theme, which the theme, if we look at it, is like, don't listen to what others expect of you, be your own person and work hard to do what you want. That's kind of what I determined as one of the themes. And I get that because she talks about how she was told, you know, all the time, she was a B student in English, but she made A's in science and math because it was very logical. And she even was working at a job, and I said, why don't you just go do accounting or be an accountant? And that's not what she wanted to do. She wanted to work hard so she could be a successful writer. And in the writing world, she is a success. A lot of people have read The Joy-Luck Club and some of her other works. And The Joy-Luck Club has even been made into a movie. So we do know that she has been successful, even though she did exactly the opposite of what everybody told her to do. And I think that kind of answers, like, what is the intention of the essay. She wanted to show people, I think all people, not just Asian Americans, that they can do other things even if they're told that they can't. So I do think that is her theme. Anyway, that is all I have. I hope y'all have a great weekend. We will talk about a lot of those checklist questions when we do a modest proposal. So when you read a modest proposal, you might want to kind of think about, what is the author's voice? What figurative language do they use? What is the tone? What is the theme? Kind of keep those in your back of your head and kind of be ready to discuss those on Monday. All right? See you on Monday. Bye.